Here's your warning not to put the fearful avoidant into a box. I had someone comment the other day on one of my videos that their fearful avoidant always shuts down and that they never care and they never think about it and they never come back and want to apologize. Do not put the fearful avoidant in a box. They will not come up in a predictable way. So that may have been your experience, but I guarantee you put them in a different relationship or you change something you're doing and you will see something completely different. Leslie Wells, Connection Coach. I help individuals earn secure attachment and help people change their relationship dynamics by looking at things through an attachment lens. And we work on understanding their partner and what speaks to their partner based on their attachment style and examining our own so that we can show up better and heal our attachment wounds and try to earn secure attachment. So, the fearful avoidant, if you're not familiar, go back and look at some of my other TikToks. I dig pretty deep. But the fearful avoidant has both sides of the spectrum. So if we have secure attachment in the middle of the spectrum, we've got anxious on one side and avoidant on the other. They go across the entire spectrum. So they will have the characteristics of both anxious attachment and avoidant attachment, and they are super unpredictable. This is what makes them very complex. And the reason that they have this attachment style is because in early childhood, with their key attachment years and their early childhood caregivers, usually their parents, they have this betrayal wound that comes from their childhood. So their parents, for whatever reason, whether it was substance abuse, mental health issues, whether there was abuse, neglect, trauma, little t traumas, chronic little things that built up over time, they learned that people that cared for them would not show up consistently for them and that love was unsafe and people were not dependable. And because as a child, you're at the mercy of your parents to meet all of your needs, when they don't do that, you become resentful and you feel like they have betrayed you by not showing up in the way that they are really supposed to. And as a child, you know, this is the person that's supposed to be safe for me. This is the person I'm supposed to be able to rely on. They're supposed to be able to meet my needs. And when they can't, then that child becomes like they feel betrayed and they become resentful of that. And they carry that forward into their adult relationships and are constantly looking for people to let them down, disappoint them, the other shoe to drop, and people to betray them or not show up well and not meet their needs consistently or show up well for them in a way that feels good to them. So the dismissive avoidant, depending on how they lean, and they typically lean the opposite of their partner. So if they are a fearful avoidant who leans anxious, then their partner will typically be more avoidant. If they are a fearful avoidant who leans avoidant, then their partner will typically be more anxious. And that really drives home this push-pull dynamic that naturally occurs within the fearful avoidant, because they want intimacy and they want closeness and they really want love and they want it to feel safe, but it doesn't feel safe. So they will lean in and then they will get frightened and then they will pull back. So they naturally create this push-pull dynamic and typically find a partner who is the opposite leaning way of them. So it just really it's like this negative cycle. Then they're constantly triggering one another. So a fearful avoidant who leans anxious can a lot of times really look like an anxious preoccupied individual, and they can do a lot of the same responses that you will see in an anxious preoccupied, like need lots of reassurance, be very clingy, want a lot of time, and they will do this when their partner is leaning away and they're really kind of leaning in. And they can also look very dismissive, meaning that if someone, if they feel unheard or unseen or they feel betrayed, they can do like this really hard shutdown and pull away, withdraw, and just shut you out. So they can look like either, but do not box them in because they can go through all of the trauma responses. They will do all 4 of the trauma responses. They will do fight, flight, fawn, and freeze. And they can swing back and forth very, very rapidly. For instance, they can come to you to address a concern or a problem that they have. And if you meet them with extreme defensiveness or a fight response back, they can either really get anxious because that disconnection feels really bad to them, especially if they feel like you're pulling away, and then they can start backtracking and they can fawn, or they may respond with a larger fight response. Another thing that they can do is they can go from a really high fight response into a complete shutdown when they feel like they're not getting anywhere and it feels hopeless. So at that point, they can go into a flight, or they can, in the middle of a fight, go into a freeze where there's really nothing in their brain and there's no thoughts to pull from, and it's kind of like they just feel numb. So they can do all of those and they can bounce back and forth from anxious to avoidant very, very quickly. It depends on what survival mechanisms helped them the most when they were a child and how they were able to get their needs met as a child and what is most familiar to them. And it also depends on how their partner leans and the behaviors of their partner, and whether or not they're getting what they need from their partner. So if they come out with a fight response and they're not getting what they need to feel that connection or to feel like their partner is co-regulating with them or helping them de-escalate, then they will try maybe a different tactic. And remember, this is subconscious, and so they're not planning this out and like going through all of these different trauma responses to see which one sticks and lands and get the relationship back where they want it. This is just subconscious, desperate attempts and protest behaviors to reconnect and to feel safe within the relationship. And if they're not able to reconnect, then it's to step back so they can get that sense of safety and avoid that fear that they're going to be betrayed or hurt or let down. So the way that a fearful avoidant responds really tells us whether or not they are a fearful avoidant. But be very careful about putting them into a box and assuming that they're always going to shut down or they're always going to lean in and be anxious, because they are all over the place. They're very unpredictable, and that's what makes them one of the most complex attachment styles to deal with. As a former fearful avoidant who really used to lean mostly anxious, I can tell you that depending on my partner's response, depending on what was going on with me internally, and depending on my own thoughts, if they were unchecked, that would determine a lot of times how I would respond. So there are some times that I would bring a very small problem, and if it was met with any defensiveness, I would immediately start to fawn, because I decided like that's not big enough to have the disconnection, and so I would start to fawn and appease and backstep to try to just keep the connection. There's other times when if it had been maybe an extended period of time where I felt unheard, then I would get bigger to be heard. And then there's other times then again that if I was met with defensiveness or I felt like I was really unseen or unheard, then I would very much go into just a full-on shutdown where I felt like it was hopeless and that there was nothing that was going to be resolved, nothing that was going to be fixed. I was going to continue to be unheard. And so I can tell you that I have enacted every single trauma response that exists. And I still, if I am met with any defensiveness or I am struggling with some of my own external things that maybe create internal problems for me, that I have to be aware of how I respond to something so that I don't slip back into those things. The other comment was that the fearful avoidant really doesn't feel any remorse, and that is 100% untrue. Unless you have someone that is just a narcissist or a sociopath, every single one of the insecure attachment styles does feel remorse. Even the dismissive avoidant, though they may not sit in those feelings and entertain those feelings, they may end up suppressing them, they do still feel remorse, and they very much still don't want to hurt their partner. The fearful avoidant is the same way. Even if they come out like a pit bull and they've got this huge fight response, the truth is they are very deep feelers and they are very sensitive, and they very much feel remorse. And after they have a big fight response, they really feel remorse, and a lot of times will come back and apologize, and they do feel that very deeply, and they're very disappointed in themselves. So let's make sure that we understand where everybody's coming from, and we realize we can't just put them in a perfect box, and that we really can't just assume that they don't have any feelings or remorse. Even the DA has feelings. We just don't always sit in them the same way, express them the same way, or process them the same way. So don't put the fearful avoidant into a box.